Oh my days.
Wow.
And here it is, a one-of-a-kind Bugatti Chiron interior.
When people think about a 3 million pounds hypercar like the Bugatti Chiron, they imagine perfection in every detail. They imagine that every single part inside the car is custom-made, rare, and built only for that car. After all, this is not just any vehicle. It is one of the fastest and most expensive machines ever built, with a powerful 16-cylinder engine for turbochargers and more than 1,500 horsepower. It represents the peak of engineering and luxury. So naturally, buyers expect everything inside it to match that level of exclusivity. But what if that idea is not completely true? What if, hidden deep inside this incredible machine, there are parts that come from much cheaper, everyday cars? That is exactly what was discovered during a rebuild project that shocked the automotive world. As the car was taken apart piece by piece, something unexpected started to appear. Parts that looked ordinary. Part numbers that matched cars costing a tiny fraction of the price. And suddenly, the question changed. It was no longer just about how amazing the Bugatti Chiron is. It became about what it is really made of. This discovery created curiosity, confusion, and even debate among car enthusiasts. Some people felt surprised, others felt disappointed. And many simply wanted to understand how something so expensive could share parts with much cheaper vehicles. But before jumping to conclusions, it is important to understand how modern cars are actually built. The truth is more complex than it first appears. The idea that every part in a hypercar is unique might sound logical, but in reality, the automotive industry works very differently. And once you understand that, the story becomes even more interesting, because it is not just about cheap parts. It is about how cars are designed, built, and sold in today's world. To understand why a hypercar might share parts with cheaper vehicles, you first need to understand how car companies operate today. Most major car brands are part of large groups that own multiple companies. These groups share technology, engineering, and components across different brands to save time and money. This is not a secret. It is a standard practice in the industry. Developing a single part from scratch can cost millions of dollars and take years of testing to ensure safety and reliability. So if one company has already developed a part that works perfectly, it makes sense for another brand within the same group to use it instead of starting again from zero. This is especially true for safety components like airbags, which must meet strict regulations and perform perfectly in dangerous situations. If a part has already been tested and proven safe, using it again is not only cheaper, but also smarter. This approach allows companies to focus their resources on improving performance, design, and innovation instead of wasting money on parts that already exist. In fact, this is one of the reasons modern cars are more reliable than ever before. However, while this makes sense from an engineering point of view, it creates an interesting situation when it comes to high-end luxury cars. Customers paying millions expect something completely unique. They expect every part to reflect the price they paid. So when people discover that some parts are shared with much cheaper cars, it can feel surprising or even unfair. But the reality is that the value of a car like the Bugatti Chiron does not come from individual parts alone. It comes from how those parts are combined, engineered, and pushed to extreme limits. Still, the discoveries made during the rebuild raise an important question. If the parts are not always unique, then what exactly are customers paying for? And why do some of these shared parts cost so much more when sold through official channels? As the rebuild project continued, more and more shared components were discovered, and each one added to the growing curiosity. One of the most surprising findings involved the airbags. Airbags are critical safety components, designed to protect passengers during a crash. They must deploy at exactly the right moment and work perfectly every time. So you would expect them to be specially designed for a car as advanced as the Bugatti Chiron. However, when the airbag was removed and examined closely, the part number told a different story. After removing the brand-specific markings, it matched exactly with an airbag used in a much more common car. This was not just a similar part. It was identical. The shape, the connectors, and even the mounting points were the same. When tested, it fit perfectly into the Bugatti's interior without any modification. This discovery was shocking, not because it meant the part was low quality, but because it showed how much sharing happens behind the scenes. And it did not stop there. Additional airbags in the car showed the same pattern, confirming that this was not a one-time coincidence. It became clear that certain parts were not unique to the Bugatti, but were instead taken from existing designs that had already been proven to work. From an engineering perspective, this makes complete sense. Using a tested part reduces risk and ensures safety. But from a customer perspective, it raises questions about value. If a part can be bought for a fraction of the price elsewhere, why does it cost so much more through official channels? This is where the discussion shifts from engineering to economics, and the story becomes even more interesting. What made the discoveries even more surprising was that not all share parts came from within the same manufacturing group. While it is expected for companies within the same group to share components, finding parts from completely unrelated brands was unexpected. One example involved a small but important component used in the airbag system. This part is responsible for triggering the airbag during a collision, and it must work instantly and reliably. When its part number was checked, it matched a component used in a completely different luxury car brand. This was not a company within the same group, but a separate manufacturer altogether. The part fitted perfectly and functioned exactly as expected. This raised new questions. How many other parts are shared across different brands without people knowing? And how common is this practice in the automotive world? The truth is that many suppliers produce parts for multiple manufacturers. These suppliers specialize in certain components and sell them to different brands, sometimes with only minor changes. This means that two completely different cars can share the same underlying part, even if they come from different companies. Again, this is not about cutting corners. It is about efficiency. But it challenges the idea that expensive cars are built entirely from unique components. It shows that even at the highest level, car manufacturing relies on shared knowledge and resources. This does not make the car less impressive, but it does change how people think about it. It highlights the difference between perception and reality, and it shows that the true value of a car is not always where people expect it to be. Among all the discoveries, some stood out more than others because they involve core mechanical components. These are the parts that directly affect how the car performs and operates. One example involved the cooling system, which is extremely important in a high-performance car. The Bugatti Chiron uses multiple radiators to manage the heat generated by its powerful engine. When some of these radiators were damaged, replacements were not easily available. So instead of waiting, a solution was found by looking for parts with similar specifications. After careful research, radiator cores from a much cheaper car were identified as a match. These cores had the same size, structure, and performance characteristics needed for the Bugatti system. With some custom work, they were adapted to fit perfectly. The result was a fully functional cooling system built from parts that cost far less than original replacements. Another example involved the starter motor, which is responsible for turning the engine on. Surprisingly, its part number matched the component used in a common diesel engine. This meant that a part costing a small amount could perform the same job as one that might cost much more through official channels. Even small components like bolts showed the same pattern. When a replacement was needed, a standard part was sourced and used successfully. These examples highlight an important point. The performance of a car does not depend only on the price of its parts, but on how they are used together. It also shows that knowledge and creativity can sometimes replace expensive solutions, which is a powerful idea. In the end, these discoveries do not mean that the Bugatti Chiron is overpriced or poorly made. In fact, it is still one of the most advanced and impressive cars ever built. The real value of the car comes from its overall design, engineering, and performance. It is not just about individual parts, but about how everything works together to create something extraordinary. However, the rebuild project does reveal something important about the automotive industry. It shows that many parts are not as exclusive as people think, and that pricing is often influenced by factors beyond just manufacturing cost. Brand value, exclusivity, and limited access all play a role in determining how much a part costs. When customers have no alternative, prices can be much higher. But when knowledge becomes available and alternatives are discovered, it changes the situation. It gives people new options and a better understanding of what they're paying for. This does not take away from the achievement of building a hypercar, but adds a new layer to the story. It shows that even the most expensive machines are built using a mix of innovation, shared technology, and practical decisions. And in many ways, that makes them even more interesting. One of the most important lessons from this entire story is not just about shared parts, but about knowledge and access. Before this rebuild project, very few people outside official dealerships knew exactly what parts were inside a car like the Bugatti Chiron. Manufacturers often keep this information limited, which means customers depend completely on authorized service centers for repairs. This creates a system where the manufacturer controls not only the car, but also everything related to maintaining it. If a part breaks, the owner usually has no choice but to go through official channels, where prices can be extremely high. But when someone takes the time to carefully inspect, document, and compare parts, that control starts to weaken. That is exactly what happened during this rebuild. By identifying part numbers, matching them with other vehicles, and testing alternatives, a new kind of knowledge was created, one that is accessible to everyone. This changes everything. It means that independent mechanics and even skilled enthusiasts can find solutions without relying entirely on manufacturers. It also shows that many repairs that seem impossible or too expensive might actually have simpler solutions. This idea is closely connected to a growing global movement known as the right to repair. This movement argues that people should have the freedom to fix their own products, whether it's a phone, a tractor, or a hypercar. When information is shared openly, it allows more people to understand how things work and find better ways to repair them. In the case of this rebuild, knowledge became more valuable than money. Instead of paying extremely high prices for official parts, alternative solutions were found using research and creativity. This does not mean that every repair should ignore official guidance, especially when safety is involved, but it does highlight the importance of transparency. When people know what they are dealing with, they can make smarter decisions. And in a world where cars are becoming more complex and controlled by software and strict systems, that kind of knowledge becomes even more powerful. Another key idea that comes out of the story is the difference between cost and value. These two words might seem similar, but they are actually very different. Cost is how much something takes to produce, while value is what people are willing to pay for it. In the case of a car like the Bugatti Chiron, the value is not just in the parts themselves. It comes from the brand, the rarity, the performance, and the experience of owning something so unique. When someone buys a hypercar, they are not just paying for metal, plastic, and electronics. They are paying for a story, a reputation, and a level of prestige that very few products can offer. That is why a part that costs a small amount to produce can be sold for much more when it is associated with a luxury brand. This might seem unfair at first, but it is actually common in many industries. For example, fashion brands often sell clothing at prices far above production cost because of the brand name and exclusivity. The same idea applies here. However, the rebuild project challenges this system by showing that, in some cases, the difference between cost and price can be very large. When a part that performs the same function can be found for a fraction of the price, it raises questions about how pricing is decided. It does not mean that the manufacturer is doing something wrong, but it does highlight how much influence branding and control have on pricing. For customers, this creates an interesting situation. On one hand, they want the assurance and quality that comes with official parts. On the other hand, they might wonder if there are more affordable options that work just as well. This balance between trust and cost is something every car owner has to think about, especially when dealing with expensive vehicles. And as more information becomes available, people are likely to become more aware of these differences and make more informed choices. Despite all the focus on shared parts, it is important not to lose sight of what makes a car like the Bugatti Chiron truly special. The real achievement is not in any single component, but in how everything is brought together to create a machine that can perform at such an extreme level. Building a car with over 1,500 horsepower that can reach incredible speeds while remaining stable, safe, and comfortable is not a simple task. It requires precise engineering, careful design, and a deep understanding of how different systems interact with each other. Even if some parts are shared with other vehicles, they still need to work perfectly within a much more demanding environment. For example, a radiator core might come from a more common car, but in a hypercar, it has to handle much higher temperatures and pressures. The way it is installed, connected, and supported becomes just as important as the part itself. The same is true for other components. A starter motor might have the same basic design as one used in another vehicle. But in this context, it has to work with a much larger and more powerful engine. This shows that engineering is not just about creating new parts, but about using existing ones in the best possible way. It is about understanding limits and pushing them further. It is also about ensuring that every part, whether unique or shared, contributes to the overall performance of the car. This is where the true value lies. It is not in the individual pieces, but in the system as a whole. And that is something that cannot be easily copied or replaced. So while the discoveries made during the rebuild are fascinating, they do not take away from the achievement of building such an advanced machine. Instead, they give us a deeper appreciation of how complex and clever modern engineering really is in the end. This entire story changes the way people think about luxury and performance cars. It shows that the reality behind these machines is more practical and interconnected than many people imagine. Instead of being built entirely from unique, never-seen-before parts, they are often the result of smart decisions, shared technology, and careful engineering. This does not make them less special. In fact, it can make them even more interesting. Knowing that a car like the Bugatti Chiron combines parts from different sources to achieve its performance adds another layer to its story. It shows that innovation is not always about creating something completely new, but about using what already exists in better ways. At the same time, it highlights the importance of transparency and knowledge. When people understand how products are made, they can appreciate them more fully and make better decisions as consumers. It also encourages a more open approach to repair and maintenance, where information is shared and alternatives are explored. For the automotive world, this could lead to a future where owners have more control and flexibility when it comes to maintaining their vehicles. And for enthusiasts, it opens up new possibilities for learning, experimenting, and improving. Ultimately, the story is not about exposing flaws or creating controversy. It is about understanding how things really work. It is about looking beyond the surface and discovering the details that make these machines so fascinating. And once you see that, you realize that the true value of a car is not just in its price or its parts, but in the knowledge, effort, and creativity that go into building it. Another important part of this story that many people do not think about is the role of third-party suppliers. Most car manufacturers, even the most expensive ones, do not make every single component themselves. Instead, they work with specialized companies that focus on producing certain types of parts, such as airbags, electronics, cooling systems, or braking components. These suppliers often provide parts to multiple brands at the same time. This means that a single company could be producing the same basic component for a budget car, a luxury sedan, and even a hypercar like the Bugatti Chiron. The difference usually comes in how those parts are finished, tested, and integrated into each vehicle. For example, an airbag unit might be built using the same internal mechanism, but the outer design, materials, and calibration could vary depending on the car it is used in. This approach allows manufacturers to rely on experts who have already spent years perfecting a specific type of component.